Jeffrey Eugenides is a rarity in contemporary American fiction, a highly serious literary novelist whose books are also enormously popular. He's written just 2 novels. His first novel, The Virgin Suicides, was made into a much-discussed film. His second novel, Middlesex, won the Pulitzer Prize and remains one of the best-selling of all contemporary American novels. Jeffrey Eugenides visited the Times recently, and we talked about his fiction, the reissue of The Virgin Suicides, and also about his hometown, Detroit, which has undergone so much change in recent years. Jeffrey Eugenides, your first novel, The Virgin Suicides, has just been re-released. It was published in 1993, I believe. How does that novel look to you now?
How does it look now? Well, it's I like the new cover. It looks good to me. I think it's kind of dangerous to go back to your old work and read it extensively, because one of 2 things can happen. Either you're terribly impressed with your early work and you're not writing as well now, which would depress you, or you find that you actually weren't as good as you thought you were at the time. So I try to keep a kind of healthy distance on it.
So The Virgin Suicides is a remarkable fable, also a realistic depiction in its way of suburban life at a certain time. Who were you when you conceived that novel and wrote it?
Who I was a 33-year-old executive secretary at the Academy of American Poets, writing that book at night for 2 hours every night on the weekends and often at work. And I was finally fired from the job for writing The Virgin Suicides on the sly. I actually have a package of manuscript pages that are that bear the letterhead of the Academy of American Poets, because I would pretend to type a letter to John Ashbery or James Merrill, and I'd actually type scenes from the novel. So that's who I was. I was a struggling first-time novelist.
One interesting question that comes up with your work is, particularly in Middlesex, is you write a great deal about the immigrant experience. It's the Greek-American experience. How many literary forebears did you have writing in this country doing the kind of fiction that you wanted to write?
Absolutely none in terms of Greek forebears. I think probably the influences on my work are Jewish writers, Bellow and Philip Roth and writers like that, whose experience always rang true to me. The idea of parents or grandparents from Europe, perhaps not so literate, working very hard to give their kids a chance in America. That all seemed very much like my own childhood.
One character in both your first 2 novels, different though they are, is Detroit and its suburbs. Some have said you're the laureate of Detroit.
Every time I go back to Detroit, there's this German word, Ruinenlust, which is the pleasure of ruins. And the concept is that you go to these places that are falling apart, and they fill you with this kind of tragic sense of not just the place, but of life itself. And that's what comes over me when I go to Detroit. My whole childhood, the city was just falling apart little by little. I was born in the city in 1960, and then the riots happened in '67, and then after that, just little by little you saw the city just getting shabbier and sort of crumbling. Now what's happened is that it's just vanishing in large swaths. They're bulldozing so much of the city. About 30 to 40% of it is now empty land. So that's what I notice when I go there, is just my city and parts of it just being erased.
Are you then still a Detroit writer? Is that where you will return for your inspiration and your stories, the way Roth has done with Newark, or could you see yourself moving outward?
Well, the only other place I've written about extensively, not extensively, but a little bit, is Chicago, which is not such a different city than Detroit. I can understand Chicago immediately from having grown up in Detroit. If I moved to San Francisco and California, I don't understand the society out there. I don't understand the people that live there and how the cogs work. So I don't think I would write about California. I think I will return to Detroit in a lot of my books, but not only. I mean, Roth has his little bits of New York and his little bits of Chicago, and Bellow wrote his New York novels. So I'll give myself a little bit of wanderlust in my fiction.
Middlesex reads like the work of quite different author in some respects from The Virgin Suicides. What are you working on now? Are we going to see another protean transformation?
I hope so, actually. I've changed my work quite a bit since Middlesex. I think when you finish a book, especially one you've worked on a long time, you just want to get out of that atmosphere and that mode. So I've been moving toward an even more realistic, tightly dramatized kind of fiction. I've published a few stories in the New Yorker that are more in this mode. Generally, my work has gone from a preoccupation with language, and I think The Virgin Suicides represents that, where it's really about the voice of the novel. Middlesex was where I taught myself how to plot. It's an extremely heavily over-plotted novel almost, and now I'm working on deeper characterization, deeper psychological portraits of my characters. So that's the trajectory that my work is going on, and what goes along with that, it seems, is a kind of deepening realism.
Well, you're the rare literary author who also has a devoted and large following. I'm sure our listeners and viewers would like to know when we might see this third novel.
The new one? Well, my editor was also asking me that. I'm supposed to finish in a couple of years from now, I think my contract says, but I'm doing my best.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey Eugenides.
Thank you.